My HR at the time completely botched my maternity leave. He shortchanged like 8 weeks of leave.
Welcome to the Be Her Village podcast. I'm your host, Caitlin McGrayus. Today, I'm joined by Akiko Thayer, founder of Maternity Leave 411, certified disability leave specialist and parental leave expert. Akiko's story starts where too many parents find themselves, confused and shortchanged by HR. After being denied 8 weeks of leave she was actually entitled to, Akiko dug into the fine print, got her time back, and turned her experience into a mission to help parents get the paid leave they deserve. Today, we're talking about why you can't assume that your HR rep is right and how to get the most out of your maternity leave and what it looks like to build the modern day village and how that includes doulas, midwives, and yes, often leave consultants. If you're getting ready for baby, you do not want to miss this one. And while you're here, don't forget to follow our show and leave us a review.
When I went out on maternity leave with my first in 2014, my HR at the time completely botched my maternity leave. They were a large company, but the HR rep that I was working with didn't understand how state leave laws, California state leave laws, and the federal law kind of worked hand in hand.
Mm.
And because of that confusion, I think it was maybe shortchanged like 8 weeks of leave. And that's precious. That's precious time to be with your child. And it was not ill-natured. She just didn't know how to manage and navigate leave. It's a very complicated process. And so I am very type A and I like to do all my research. And I knew that she was wrong. And I was living in San Francisco at the time, and in San Francisco had this amazing legal organization. I'm blanking on the name, but I'll get back to you on that. Um, San Francisco Legal Aid, that's what it was called. They provided free legal advice. And so I reached out to them and I explained my leave situation, and they confirmed that my understanding was correct. And so, long story short, I went back to HR, told her what my understanding was true, that what my understanding was, and then she was like, "Oops, sorry, you're right." But the back and forth was like 3 weeks long. Mind you, I have a 3-week-old baby, and it's just not something that you want to deal with when you're having a baby, when you're in the thick of things. And when the dust settled, you know, I thought to myself, I can't be the only person, the only mother, only parent going through this struggle. There has to be, yeah, it's wild, right? And so what I did was, and I was on maternity leave. By this point, my baby was a little bit older, so I had some downtime. And so I started blogging about my understanding of maternity leave. And then that, for whatever reason, that blog got traction. And then from there, I decided to start a Facebook group all around helping people navigate their maternity and parental leave. And that Facebook group ended up blowing up as well. And then at some point when that blew up, it was probably around 2016. That's when I realized I think I can make this into a business. And so and at that time, it was, I think there was one other consultant, Milk Your Benefits, and I don't know if she's still in this realm. I think she is. But it was just her and I, doing this type of work. And so it was really uncharted territory. And so, before I could have, for me at least, before I turned it into an official business, I wanted to go back and get, my credentials, if you will. And so I went back and I got my certification as a disability leave management specialist. And then I also took some coursework in California leave laws, California HR and leave laws. And so, once I got those credentials under my belt, that's when I formally launched my business. And it's just wonderful. I love giving parents, essentially, I'm giving parents the gift of time during this just remarkable and very important time. And it's a very vulnerable time too. And so, being able to help a parent maximize the time that they have at home, it's just so precious. When you spend more time at home, there's benefits on the parent, there's benefit to the child, and there's also benefits to the employer as well. When you're going back to work fully ready to go, you're going back as a, as a recharged employee. And so it really, there is a lot of data to suggest, to show that providing leave, especially if it's paid leave, that there is a significant increase in retention and that individual, that employee staying with that employer for longer. And so it's a win-win for all parties. And so, I love what I do, but that's my long story short of, or long story long of getting into this work.
I absolutely love that. And oh my goodness, there's so many directions I want to go. I almost one thing I just want to mention because it feels like something to start with is you almost got lucky in that by saying, "Hey, HR, this was wrong and this thing happened." And they were like, "Oh, okay, cool, sure." And you didn't have to sue them because some people
Yeah,
end up having to literally sue their employers in order
yeah,
to get what's due to them. So it still sounds like it was just so unnecessarily stressful. And
absolutely.
when you said you had a 3 week old, it's like, oh, I was imagining you being like 5 or 6 months pregnant, going through your company handbook and working this out. The idea at 3 weeks postpartum, I don't think I was wearing shirts yet.
Yeah, I was probably on my email also not wearing a shirt, but that's beside the point.
But that burden of trying,
Yeah,
like being in the thick of maternity leave
yeah,
and then having sort of the rug slipped, pulled
yeah,
out from under you,
yeah.
that's an incredible story.
Absolutely. And I think when I speak to clients, the overwhelming kind of feedback I get a lot of times, or the overwhelming experience that I get a lot of times is, well, it was HR told me this. Of course
Mm.
it's true, right? And because that's what they're there for. And again, by no means are HR representatives doing this, intentionally. I just think that they're just, at the end of the day, an HR representative, they have so many facets of their job. And most likely leave management probably is a very small slice of their job. And because it's such a small slice, they probably aren't going into the thick and the nuances of how leave laws work, especially if it's a, nationwide company that has employees in different states. And I think that's where it gets tricky. And so again, no, it's not ill-natured, but what ends up happening is, so many parents, they just take what HR said as the truth, and then they end up having to go back to work, say 6 weeks post-birth or earlier than anticipated. And it was not until, they read somewhere, online or what have you, they're like, oh my gosh, I could have stayed at home for much longer, and I hear that often. I hear that often.
Yes, I love that you are approaching this, both your situation and the work you're doing with parents seeking leave, that there isn't ill intent necessarily, right? And maybe there is, but it's not the assumption that we're working on. That's not the baseline assumption. The baseline assumption is everyone's doing the best they can. And that I know for me, professionally and non-professionally, that is sort of like a guiding foundational
Yeah.
principle.
Yeah.
Everyone's doing the best they can, and I'm going to assume everyone's doing the best they can. But this actually leads beautifully into what I want to ask you about, which is why is
Mm.
finding or accessing the
Yeah.
parental leave that we are due, that we
Mhm.
deserve, that we need, right? It's like both somehow both a luxury and also just a vital a vital element of
Yeah.
parenthood.
Yeah.
Why is it so difficult, even when everyone is well-meaning, why is it so difficult to access? Can you give us some insight into this system and what are the hurdles that
Mhm.
have ended up in this system where it's sort of like a patchwork and very
Yeah.
confusing?
Yeah. So at the baseline level, from a federal leave or federal law perspective, we have the Federal Family and Medical Leave Act, FMLA, and it provides 12 weeks of job protective leave. It provides leave for pregnancy, childbirth, as well as baby bonding. There's other host of other reasons to take federal FMLA leave, but in the context of maternity and parental leave, pregnancy, childbirth, and baby bonding. So at the baseline federal level, all we have is the federal FMLA, which provides 12 weeks of leave. Now, the rub about federal FMLA is that there's requirements in order to be eligible for the federal FMLA leave. You have to work for an employer with over 50 employees. So that cuts out any employee who might work for a small company, a mom and pop
Mhm.
shop. You also have to have been employed with your employer for at least 12 months. So that cuts out anyone who just started a job but started pregnant, started the job pregnant. And then also, lastly, the other requirement is you have to have worked at least 1,250 hours. So anyone who works part-time, that takes them out too. I think the current stat is only about 55% of Americans are actually even eligible for the federal FMLA. And so that first hurdle is that only 55% of Americans have access to the federal FMLA job protected leave. And then on top of that, if you live in a state that has its own statutory leave law, not every state does, but for instance, states like Colorado, California, New York, they might have their own leave laws that run concurrently with the federal FMLA. And that's where it gets tricky because a lot of times these state leave laws provide much longer leave than the federal FMLA. So, for instance, in California, where I am, we have the California Pregnancy Disability Leave Act, which provides 4 months of job protective leave. On top of that, we have the California Family Rights Act, which can provide an additional 12 weeks of baby bonding leave. So in California, you're looking at around 7 months of job protective leave. Those leave laws have to run alongside the federal FMLA, and that's where it gets tricky. Anytime that you are dealing with two leave laws running concurrently, that's, I feel like, where a parent's mind will explode.
Mm.
Being everything, when and how it runs concurrently, and also for an employer as well. In my instance, the HR rep, that's where she messed up, and so that's where you end up getting shortchanged. So the whole process itself is just kind of set up for failure. There's so many nuances, so many layers that go on top of leave laws that really the burden is placed on the parent to figure it out. There's no one-stop shop resource that will tell you all this. Now, of course, if the US could beef up its policy and just provide, say, 6 months, a year of job protected leave for any, parent going out on leave, then that'll make things a lot easier, right? But until that happens, you are forced to just kind of do your own research, figure out, one, are you eligible for federal FMLA, and two, do you live in a state that has a statutory leave law? And then you have to figure out how do they all kind of work alongside each other. And then an added layer of complexity is wage replacement. The federal FMLA, many of these statutory leave laws are unpaid leaves of absences. And so it protects your job, which is great, but it's unpaid. And so that's the other thing that you have to look into. How are you going to pay yourself while you're out on leave? And the kind of the primary option that many might go to is, do they live in a state that has a statutory paid leave benefit? Right now, 13 states plus Washington, D.C., they have statutory paid benefits for family and medical leave. But if you don't have that, then you have to cobble up, does your employer provide a short-term disability policy that you might be able to access? Do I have to use sick time, PTO? So it's truly a puzzle piece, and you're just really putting together all the puzzle pieces to make your maternity and paternity leave picture kind of cohesive. And it's a lot, and that's kind of exactly what I do as with my work. I will take an employee, look at exactly what leave laws they're eligible for. I'll also review their employer policy, make sure everything fits together, and then also look at what wage replacement options that they might be eligible for. And what I do is essentially put all the pieces together and put them together in like a really nice timeline so that they know exactly when they can start their leave, when they can, how long they can be out, when they actually have to go back to work, how they'll be paid, when they'll be paid, how much they'll be paid. And so, I think one client once said to me that I was like the easy button, on their return, on their leave. And that's exactly what I like to view myself as, because I'm sure anyone listening to this, when I was explaining how all the leave details work, I'm sure it's just mind blowing, and it's very difficult.
I mean, my head is spinning. I think I went to another planet. Well, it's just like too much data. And I'm sitting here thinking, wow, this feels overwhelming to me. And I am not pregnant. I'm not postpartum. I'm fully clothed. My income is not at risk. I don't,
Yeah,
like I have no stake in this. And still, it's like, it feels overwhelming
yeah,
to hear of it. So I'm sitting here thinking, wow, thank goodness we have 9 months of pregnancy, although really you barely know you're pregnant for the first two of them. So it's less than that. And in the last month, I don't know, I don't feel
yeah,
like we have any brain space for
yeah,
this. But thank goodness we have the time because there's so much to figure out during
yeah,
pregnancy, right? We're
yeah,
trying to prepare our home, we're trying to prepare our bodies, we're,
yeah,
getting prenatal education. Hopefully,
yeah,
we're
yeah,
engaging with the medical system
yeah,
for most of us at a higher rate than we ever
mhm,
have before. It's for
yeah,
most of us the first time that we're really entering as like a patient that goes
yeah,
all the time. And then to try and figure out, by the way, we're still working while we're trying to figure all of this out. So it's not
yeah,
like you have additional hours in the day to figure out this leave.
yeah,
And it can feel like you're a little bit on your own, especially when you hear stories like this, like that your HR rep, as lovely as they may be and as competent as they may be, might not have all of those nuances. And
yeah,
this is my doula heart speaking, but like it sounds like it's just one more layer of this stepping into your power as a
mhm,
mother. It is that you cannot sit back passively and
no,
have people tell you, your doctor's going to tell you you need an induction, your HR rep's going to tell you you get 6 weeks of short term, whatever, like you
yeah,
cannot sit back. There's a mama bear mode that gets
yeah,
activated even before the baby comes.
absolutely,
And
absolutely,
often that looks like hiring a doula, hiring a midwife, hiring a leave consultant, hiring somebody to help afterwards. Like the village that we rely on and talk
yeah,
about so often in 2025 looks like paid professionals, at
yeah,
least some of
yeah,
it.
absolutely, absolutely,
And it can really, I would imagine, and I would love for you to talk about this, like the the impact it has emotionally on your clients. Like what do you see? Are people coming in anxious and stressed? How are they
yeah.
getting better results than they would if they just sort of went on their own? I would love to like talk about that and then we'll get into how we actually do all of all of this lovely
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
navigating.
I mean, just listening to it is stressful as it is, right? And so, yes, many times when a client comes in, they're very stressed out, they're really overwhelmed. I think overwhelmed is probably the most accurate
Mm,
word to use. And so, once I tell them exactly what their leave rights are, how everything works together, it is, they're able to kind of exhale.
mm,
And yeah, absolutely. I do think working with a consultant really not only helps them maximize their time, but I think for me, one of with my work, that I really like to advocate for is extending your disability period, because the standard recovery period for childbirth is 6 weeks post vaginal birth or 8 weeks post C-section. Whoever made it that medical standard was clearly someone who did not have a baby, right? And who really, I mean, people are still bleeding and 12 weeks post birth.
You're
It's
not allowed to separate dogs from their babies, right? Before like 8 weeks, 12 weeks.
yeah, it's
It
wild.
blows my mind when I found that out. And somehow I've had both a vaginal birth and a cesarean. I needed way more than 8 weeks to recover from both. So I'm not sure where this, like, if you have a vaginal birth, you only need 6 weeks
I
on
know.
which planet?
Exactly. And it's wild. And so, and I think a lot of moms just probably see that as the medical rule. And what they don't know is you can absolutely advocate for yourself. Talk to your OB that about any sort of post-birth complications. I've had many clients who say that with their first, they were in agony, but they didn't know that it was an option to extend disability. And so what I really like to encourage all mothers to do is really advocate for themselves, speak to their OB, or midwife, doula, etc. If you're not feeling 100% post-birth, ask for that extension. And most of the time, if you ask for that extension, your job will be protected under some applicable leave law. And you also might be paid for that extension as well. And so, really it's a win-win. Not only are you giving yourself time to recover and heal, but your job is protected and you might also get paid for that time. And so, I think working with anyone who has this knowledge, I think really allows a mother to heal and just really be the best mom that she can be. And I think going back to the whole village, concept, you need that village in order to succeed and to thrive, and some, and you don't have all the answers. And so it's, what better way to form your village and get expert advice, on doing kind of what the next steps are. And so, yeah, I think it's one of those things where if you don't know it, you won't ask for it, right? But if you do,
Absolutely.
if you know what your rights are, if you know what the possibilities are, then definitely advocate, talk to your OB, and then most likely your doctor will be able to extend that time. And of course, how long someone's disability period can get extended for, that's going to vary depending on the diagnosis, your treatment plan, etc. But again, if you don't ask, you won't ever know, right? And so that's what I like to tell everyone. That's what I like to tell all the moms out there.
That's just good life advice, by the way. You should just go for it because
Yeah,
because if you
exactly.
don't ask, the answer is no. It's
Yeah,
automatically no because you never even
exactly.
asked.
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
love just when you briefly touch on that you need the time to heal. I just sort of want to underline that statement because I think that sometimes we get this like fierce individualism, like I'm going to go back to work before somebody else. I'm so good at working so hard. It's like you don't get a gold star for running back to work. Just
No.
you don't get a gold star. You not only don't get a gold star, but just I would love to just reframe it completely to you deserve that rest. You need the
Yeah.
time to recover. Your baby
Hmm.
deserves that time
Yeah.
with their parents,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Forming that family bond. You'll never, ever, ever get that time back. And it's hard to sort of underline
Yeah.
how important, how sweet. And I just literally yesterday was my son's 11th birthday, my VBAC baby, my second baby. And I looked at like the picture of like when we took him home for the first time, it was like the first time we placed him on our bed. And I feel like I could be right back there thinking
Yeah.
about it. And it's this cocoon. It's this beautiful, beautiful time that you get away from the outside world, away from your chores and your pressures and emails and meetings and all, you
Yeah.
get to just be and you get to like step out of the normal timeline.
Exactly.
And we deserve that. The
Yeah.
babies deserve that and the parents deserve that. And so it's not, like I feel like we're talking about laws and HR and that's all good and that's why we're here talking
Yeah.
about this, but also like we're going through all of that to get you to that cocoon where you
Exactly.
are
Yeah.
becoming a mother, becoming a father, becoming parents, becoming a family. And
Exactly.
even if it's your fifth kid, it's still brand
Yeah.
new. And, it feels kind of crazy to think that even the fifth one could be so new and exciting. But as someone with three, the third one was just as wild and fun and
Yeah.
exciting and all the
Absolutely.
things as the
Yeah.
first
Yeah.
two.
No, absolutely. And I think that, we it just, taking leave just needs to be normalized.
Mm,
I taking there just isn't there aren't many opportunities where you can, just take time away from work, without any fear, judgment, etc. There just isn't, and what better time to do that than when you have a baby, both from non-birthing mother as well as for the non-birthing parent as well. And I think we need to normalize that. We need to normalize taking a pause, taking time away from work, to be present with whatever we have in front of us, in the context of parental leave. I guess it's being one with your child, with your family.
I hope that this conversation with Akiko gave you the clarity, the confidence, and maybe even a little bit of fire that you needed to advocate for yourself as you navigate your maternity leave journey. Paid leave should not be the mystery that it is. It should be a right. Every single baby deserves it. Every parent deserves it. And where we are right now in our country is very far from the ideal. If this episode was valuable to you or helped you or taught you something you didn't know, please take a moment to hit subscribe, follow our podcast so you never miss an episode, and leave us a 5-star review. It really helps us be seen by more parents just like you. Next week, we dive in deeper to this conversation with Akiko and learn all about how to actually have the conversation with your HR rep. What happens when your company denies you the leave that you deserve? So hit subscribe, follow us, and I'll see you next week. Bye.